Okay, so I'm already stoked by the fact that Paizo gave me a full map of the Desna's Path galaxy for Starfinder, but I'm just now discovering that there is a black hole called Old Rovagug on this map. Paizo, you have sold this product to me. Today, we're going to talk about the Starfinder Galaxy Guide for Starfinder 2nd Edition on today's episode of the Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I am a storyteller here to help you take your first steps into the unknown. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome to a storyteller's review of the Starfinder Galaxy Guide. So, here in a few weeks, Starfinder 2nd Edition will be launching at Gen Con, and by the way, I will be at Gen Con, so if you're going to be there, please be sure to look me up. I would love to have a chance to meet you in person. But even though Starfinder 2nd Edition hasn't officially launched yet, the first book for Starfinder 2nd Edition is already available. It is a sort of setting guide for Starfinder called the Starfinder Galaxy Guide. And in today's video, what I'd like to do is take a quick overlook at the Starfinder Galaxy Guide and kind of ask the question, what kind of stories does this product help storytellers and players tell at their gaming table? Now, something that I'm trying to do a little bit of a better job of in my videos is front-loading the information so you can get the core idea just right at the start. So the TLDW of my review is this. Paizo knocked this book out of the park for me. We'll get into this in the full video here in a bit, but some of my principal concerns about Starfinder 1st Edition, I can already tell Paizo is addressing them and addressing them well in how they are approaching Starfinder 2e. The Galaxy Guide is a little bit of a mixed product. It serves both game masters and players as they prepare for Starfinder 2nd Edition. Longtime fans of the channel may know that sometimes I'm a little bit iffy on books that sort of split their attention between the two sides of the gaming table, but honestly, this book is really solid and manages to be useful to both game masters and players in a way that I think is going to be effective and supportive when Starfinder 2 actually launches. So my big picture takeaway of this particular product is Paizo is giving us a fantastic first step into Starfinder 2e, and I really like the direction this book took. So those are my overall thoughts. I will have some timestamps down in the video description if you want to jump around to specific topics and see some of my specific ideas. I will not be covering everything in this book, but I want to give you a decent overview of what you can expect to find, whether you're a storyteller or a player, and hopefully help you get an idea of whether or not this book is for you. Now, as with any review on this channel, please remember my universal grain of salt, which is the best review of any product is always to check that product out for yourself, which means I do encourage you, if you have the chance to check this out at your fine local gaming store, borrow it from a friend, or something to that effect, that is always going to give you the best information of whether or not a purchase is right for you. But I will say, I'm pretty solid on this book. Paizo made me happy with this one. But with all that out of the way, let's dive into the Starfinder Galaxy Guide. Okay, so before we get into specifics on the Starfinder Galaxy Guide, one of the big picture things that I want to talk about that really stands out to me in this particular book is I feel like Paizo is covering for one of the biggest weaknesses of Starfinder in the first edition of the game. If you go back to some of my older videos on Starfinder, my biggest complaint about first edition was there wasn't a lot of support for game masters. I loved a lot of stuff about Starfinder. It was a very experimental system. It really felt like the designers were having a lot of fun with the system. It had, I will die on this hill, Starfinder has the best setting writing in any TTRPG I've ever seen. There were a lot of strengths of Starfinder, but one of the biggest problems of the system, and something I struggled with when I tried to run Starfinder First Edition, is the Game Master support just wasn't there the way it was for Pathfinder First Edition, or especially Pathfinder 2e when Pathfinder 2e dropped. Starfinder Second Edition, I can already tell that's going to be changing. We have both the Starfinder Galaxy Guide, which is the book we're looking at today, and Paizo has already announced a Starfinder GM Core that will be coming out in the near future, representing two different products that have a lot of Game Master focused content that I really think is going to make this game a lot more accessible and approachable for storytellers. That is far and away my favorite thing about this book and what it signals for Starfinder 2e as a whole. It is taking one of my favorite settings, one of my favorite conceptual games, and really giving it the storyteller support that game needed. Taking a look at the table of contents, the Galaxy Guide is divided into essentially 5 chapters. Chapter number 1 is an introduction chapter that's going to cover the setting and the timeline of the setting, and obviously it's going to be a very brief introduction to the setting and the timeline. Chapter 2, the largest chapter, is called Adventures, and this sort of divides the setting up into different types of stories that you can tell. The listed options here are dystopian, high-tech, fantasy, war-torn, into the unknown, horror, and weird. And essentially, what the Adventures chapter is going to do is it's going to kind of lay out how you can use Starfinder to tell these types of games. So if you're interested in a sci-fantasy game, you would turn to the fantasy section under Adventures, and it would lay out some of the places you can use, some of the people you can use, and some of the ideas you could explore. And if you wanted to go for a more dystopian setting, you'd use that section. Next, you have the Ports of Call, which is an introduction to 4 major locations in the Starfinder setting: Absalom Station, the Adari spaceship, the Second City, and Starlance. And then, at the end of Ports of Call, it has a section on backgrounds that I will get into in a little more depth here in a bit. Next, in Chapter 4, you have Factions, which are important groups of people in the Starfinder setting. We have a Bader Corps, the Free Captains, the Hell Knights, the Knights of Golarion, Starfinder Society, the Xena Wardens, and then a couple of pages on some of the minor factions that are present. And then finally, Chapter 5 introduces 6 new Ancestries that players can use to build their player characters. In particular, we have the Astrozoans, the Contemplatives, the Dragonkin, the Kalo or Kalo, I don't know how that one's supposed to be pronounced, the Sarcesians, and the Vlaka. So each of these chapters is pretty self-explanatory, and we'll look at some examples from each chapter to help us understand them. But what I want to point out here, Chapter 1, the introduction, is really sort of the Game Master overview of the setting, and is definitely a Game Master-oriented chapter. Chapter 2 continues this idea with more Game Master-oriented content. It gives you different types of stories and how you can tell those stories as a Game Master. Moving on to Chapter 3, the sections on Absalom Station, the Adari, the Second City, and Starlance kind of fit in between the Game Master and player side of the table. It definitely has a lot of stuff that Game Masters can use, but you can also see where players might want to pull some content from there, get some ideas from it. However, the truly player character oriented content begins at the end of Chapter 3 in the section labeled Backgrounds, where it begins to give specific mechanical options for your players. And those background options are divided into the different types of adventures that were discussed in Chapter 2. So you'll have dystopian backgrounds, war-torn backgrounds, weird backgrounds, things like that, and it's even got a healthy mix of common, uncommon, and rare backgrounds in this particular section from Chapter 3. Then, moving on to Chapters 4 and 5, the factions and the ancestries, these two chapters are very heavily player-centered. The factions are going to give you not just details about those factions, but mechanical options that players can use related to those factions, and then obviously the Ancestries chapter, that is heavily geared towards players, as it essentially introduces 6 new ancestry options that players can take advantage of. In other words, what this book does really, really well is move from Game Master content to player content in a very logical way, and unlike other books that Paizo has done, they don't really mix too much. In a lot of other Paizo products, you'll have Game Master content and player content that are on the same page, and it's kind of frustrating for me because I feel like as a storyteller, I can't show my players their content without running the risk that they might see stuff that I don't want them to see. This book does a better job of kind of pulling those two parts separate from one another in such a way that as a game master you can kind of say, okay, here's this book, open up to page 96, anything from page 96 on you're welcome to read, it's not going to spoil anything for you. If you're going to have a book that's intended for game masters and players both, I think pulling that content apart like they do here is just very intelligent and very well done. So props to Paizo. This is a positive first step in my opinion. So now what I want to do is I want to take a look at some sections from each of the chapters. We're going to skip over chapter number 1 because I don't think you really want to see a timeline for Starfinder. That's pretty self-explanatory. We're going to start with Chapter 2, and then I'm going to go through each chapter and just give you a quick taste of some of the content you can expect to find to give you an idea of how this book is structured and what you can gain either as a storyteller or a player. We'll start in Chapter 2, which is the Adventures chapter, and this is the section on Into the Unknown. It is the sort of storytelling that you typically think of for science fiction or sci-fantasy or space opera. This idea that the universe is huge, it's vast, and there's just all sorts of, well, unknown things out there. And the idea of going and exploring and just discovering new places and new things, that is one of those story beats that's really well covered by this type of game. And so Paizo in this section kind of talks about how as a storyteller you can approach Into the Unknown adventures. They give you ideas for campaign starters and adventure hooks. So for example, maybe your characters are stowaways on a ship that's traveling to a distant star system. Or maybe there is a freighter that encounters a cosmic mystery out in the vast and your players have to go and deal with this situation. There's all kinds of different adventures that can fall under this Into the Unknown style of storytelling, and from the very beginning of this section, Paizo's just giving you hooks as a storyteller, ideas of these are some of the things you can do to model this type of story. The next thing that they do in each of these adventure sections is they highlight some regions in the Starfinder setting that could fit well with these kinds of stories. One example is the Gelid Edge. The Gelid Edge is the portion of the Pact World star system that's out past where Octurne used to be. For those of you who don't know, the planet Octurne, which used to be the rough equivalent of Pluto for the Starfinder setting, well, turns out that Octurne kinda hatched and kind of unleashed a new eldritch deity that's causing some interesting interactions in and across the universe. On the darkest edge of the Pact World system, things start to make less sense. It's a place where occult power and haunted starships are a completely logical thing that your players might encounter. So this section is going to introduce the Gelid Edge, talk a little bit about its history. It's going to tell you about these creatures known as the midwives that helped the deity known as the newborn come into being. It talks about way stations, pockets of civilization in and around the Gelid Edge that could serve as a base of operations for your players. It'll discuss culture, some important hotspots, important faces, aka important people that your players might encounter, and it'll even discuss a day in the Gelid Edge, giving you an idea of what life is like in that area in the universe. They will talk about the area as it relates to campaigns, so here you have the Gelid Edge in campaigns, encounter mode, what kind of creatures might be encountered, exploration mode, what kind of challenges players might have to deal with, downtime mode, what kind of things players might be trying to accomplish long term, campaign starters, one-shots, side stories, ideas for longer campaigns. Paizo gives you a lot of different ways that you can use the Gelid Edge in a Starfinder 2e game. And then Paizo moves on to another location that you might be able to use in a similar fashion. This is a reference to the Jinsol Iocracy. You have no idea how many takes it took for me to get that right. And it talks about a type of creature that has been a common problem in Starfinder known as the Jinsol. Here's a picture for your viewing pleasure. It talks about some of the things that they've done, some of the things that are ongoing for them, and some of the regions of space where the Jinsol are active, and how that might impact player characters. Again, you have culture, important faces, Jinsols in a campaign, campaign starters, one-shot side stories, advice for giving longer campaigns, and then they move on to another section you can use, Kazmurg's Absurdity, a region of space so unreliable that you can only navigate it through specific physical maps. They literally have turned a small section of the Starfinder setting into almost a pirate-esque seafaring campaign. Like, there's just so many great ideas here. Again, you have hotspots, important figures in the area, and advice on how to use the absurdity in your campaigns. Both starters, one-shots, side stories, and of course, as mentioned, long campaigns. All three of these different settings represent ways that you can do Into the Unknown style stories in the Starfinder setting, and Paizo gives just a ton of stuff that game masters can use for this type of storytelling. And I want to stress, Into the Unknown is just one type of story that Paizo supports in this section. You have dystopian, high-tech fantasy, war-torn, Into the Unknown that we just talked about, horror, weird. Paizo gives you lots of options for lots of different types of stories, and as a storyteller, this is golden. Paizo, thank you. This is the kind of support for Game Masters I want to see for Starfinder 2nd Edition. This book, you have hit what I want, and I appreciate it so much. Chapter 3 is going to give some information on some specific major locations in the Starfinder setting. It talks about Absalom Station and 3 other locations. One that I think is very interesting is the Adari spaceship, and it just gives you some more details about this massive homeworld spaceship for the Kasathas. You get details about hotspots on the Adari, the culture of the Adari, what life is like there, and some of the important faces, some of the important NPCs that your players might interact with. They actually go into some fun details about how the calendar works on the Adari spaceship, and kind of like the previous section that we talked about, you get some campaign starters, you get some ideas for one-shot, side stories, long campaigns. Essentially, for each of these 4 kind of major settings, you get some really healthy suggestions about how to use those in a campaign. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, it's at the end of the Ports of Call section that you really start to get into the player character focused content with the various backgrounds that are on offer. And you'll see here that these backgrounds are actually broken down. by the kind of story that they help to tell. So, for example, here we have dystopian backgrounds, and you've got bartenders, bouncers, hustlers. You've got an uncommon background called the arena veteran. And then, if you go a little bit further, you have explorer backgrounds, which are intended for the into the unknown style of storytelling that I was highlighting in the Adventures chapter. So you have space trucker, salvager, hitchhiker, and the uncommon Creesh-born, which is related to a region of the setting called the Diaspora. You'll see fantasy backgrounds, high-tech backgrounds, horror backgrounds, and I've pointed out a couple of uncommon backgrounds so far. Here we have an example of the Escaped Experiment background, which is a rare background that's included in this section. And you even have backgrounds that are appropriate for people who grew up in one of those busy ports of call that is featured earlier in this chapter. So that's just a really quick sample of how these backgrounds have been sorted around the type of story that you might be trying to tell at your gaming table. And I just want to stop and emphasize again that as a storyteller, I really appreciate this. Communicating with your players and really setting a healthy expectation of what kind of game you plan to run and what kind of story you're aiming for, and then being able to offer your players content that is geared towards those types of stories specifically, that is just really good game design, and I love the fact that Paizo did this. And yes, they even have weird backgrounds for the weird story options that are presented in the previous chapter. Next up, we have the Factions section of the Galaxy Guide, and this is another section that I really love. At first glance, this looks like it would be Game Master-oriented content, and there's certainly going to be a lot of stuff that Game Masters can be inspired by in this section, but this section, as I've said, is really geared towards player characters. It highlights different factions in the Starfinder setting, and one of the ones that I want to highlight is one of my personal favorite factions in the Starfinder setting, which is a Bader Corps. A Bader Corps, as you can see from this sidebar here, is a faith-based mega corporation that has edicts of being engaged in commerce and working hard, and is run by Executive Archdirector Susie, which is, and I quote, a boisterous female uplifted bear. I'm serious, the Church of a Bader Corps is one of my favorite things in the Starfinder setting, and I am always entertained when a Bader Corps gets some representation in this game. For each of the major factions listed, you're going to get a discussion of their goals, their structure, their operations, divisions inside of that faction. You're going to get some corresponding artwork to go along with the faction. And then, fairly quickly in, you'll get an archetype option associated with characters that are part of that faction. So, for example here, we have the Abater Corps rep, which allows you to be a rep for Abater Corps. And I'm not going to dig into everything that this particular archetype offers. It's going to follow the normal archetype structure that we've seen in Pathfinder 2e and going forward in Starfinder 2e, but you'll have the dedication feat that you take in place of one of your class feats, and then you'll have some other feat options that you can take later on to develop that archetype. I do want to point out that they've got a pretty healthy mix with these various archetypes in this book. For the Abater Corps rep, 3 of the feats from this archetype, it's Who You Know, Do You Know Who I Work For, and Maximize Profits, are all skill feats. So even though they're associated with this archetype, you don't necessarily have to burn class feats only to advance your abilities. Some of the options that are presented are skill feats, and you can take them in place of a normal skill feat. And I like the fact that Paizo took the time to mix options like this into the player character options presented in this book. After Abater Corps, you'll get a few other factions, so you'll get groups like the Free Captains, the Hell Knights, and really I mostly just came to this page because the artwork here is awesome. The Knights of Galarian, the Starfinder Society, and the Xeno Wardens, along with a few pages containing brief discussions of some of the minor factions in the setting, such as the Akashic Society or the Aspis Consortium. I imagine, though, for players, the section of this book that's going to be the most interesting is probably going to be the last chapter, which covers new ancestry options for Starfinder 2e. And yes, it is kind of weird saying new ancestry options for a game that technically hasn't launched yet, but these ancestry options are a little bit of the, for lack of a better term, weirder options. The core Starfinder book is going to have your humans and your Skittermanders and your Vesk, some of your more standard ancestries that you anticipate seeing for Starfinder, whereas the Galaxy Guide offers some of the stranger alien species that players might be interested in playing. This is going to include the shape-shifting Astrozoans, the big-brained, literally, contemplatives, and one of my personal favorites, the Sarcesians. The backstory on the Sarcesians goes along with the asteroid belt that exists inside of the Pact World system. That asteroid belt is called the Diaspora, and it used to be 2 different planets that were violently destroyed and became the asteroid belt, but among the inhabitants of those planets, some of them managed to adapt to this new environment that they had, this scattering of asteroids that used to be their home worlds, and the resulting group is this ancestry known as the Sarcesians, which have the ability to grow energy-based butterfly wings out of their back, allowing them to briefly sail through the void of space. Literally, Sarcesians have the ability to pop out these beautiful butterfly wings and fly from asteroid to asteroid, allowing them to maintain a bit of a civilization where you would think normally it'd be impossible after the destruction of their homeworlds. As with any ancestry option that you would see in Pathfinder or Starfinder, you're going to get the typical layout here, so you'll get some brief descriptions of what your ancestry is like, what other ancestries might tend to think of you. You'll get a discussion of the physical description of Sarcesians. You'll get a sidebar that has all of the important attributes, HP, size, speed, attribute boosts and flaws, languages. I do really enjoy the fact that Sarcesians come with a version of sign language automatically, because you can't speak in the void of space. As someone who uses sign language, I think it's cool that that is included with this ancestry. You also get their traits. Here you have a discussion of their energy wings and how those work, and even the suspended respiration ability that gives Sarcesians the capacity to fly from one asteroid to another without necessarily suffocating. You'll get a discussion of their beliefs, along with popular edicts and anathemas in Sarcesian society, and then you get into some of the mechanical options. Here we have some heritages for the Sarcesian: Asteroid Hopper, Compact, Crease Raised, Sharp-Eyed, and Stellar. And then naturally after that you'll have a list of feat options associated with the ancestry. The Sarcesians are known for being travelers. So for example, you have an ancestry feat called Avid Traveler that reflects that aspect of Sarcesian culture. And while I'm not going to go through every single option for the Sarcesians, I will point out that there's a 5th level option called Atmospheric Flight, giving them the ability to fly in normal atmosphere. A 9th level option called Advanced Atmospheric Flight, and a 17th level option called Return to the River. I don't even have a chance to get into all the lore behind this one, but a 17th level feat called Return to the River. You have a soul-deep connection to the River Between. When you're in mortal peril, the River Between beckons you home and into its embrace. When you would die, you don't. Instead, you are encased in a cocoon of golden solar energy and disappear, teleporting across the galaxy to the River Between. 2d6 later, this chrysalis hatches, and you emerge fully healed in a random location along the River Between in the Diaspora. The butterfly people have a literal butterfly reincarnation effect built into their ancestry. Paizo, I love this. Obviously, this book is going to be full of a ton of fun mechanical options for players, and tons of entertaining lore things that game masters can really sink their teeth into. I have only glossed over what Paizo included in this book, but as I said early on in this review, I love the Starfinder setting. It is truly, in my opinion, the best example of setting writing in the TTRPG industry. This book is engaging in that setting in all of the ways I love to see. There's great content for players, there's great content for game masters. Truly, there is a ton of stuff that I enjoy in this book. And while I'm not going to show it again because, honestly, getting it to appear right on my screen is a little bit annoying, the fact that there is a full galaxy map that I get to obsess over that comes with this book, Paizo, thank you. You created the exact kind of book that I love. You could not have given me a better start to Starfinder 2nd Edition. I love the Galaxy Guide. But the time has come for me to turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about the Galaxy Guide for Starfinder 2e, and do you appreciate the information and options presented to game masters and players in this book? Also, do you have any particular questions about the Starfinder Galaxy Guide? If so, jump down to the comment section and let me know. Share your thoughts, your opinions, your ideas. The best part of this channel is getting to interact with you and hear your thoughts, so definitely share them down below, and let me know what you think of this product. I know that this is a product that I'm going to be excited to add a physical version of to my own collection. Paizo really knocked this one out of the park for me. Before you go, don't forget to do all of the stuff that helps to support this channel. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. All of those links will be in the video description down below. And as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.